Welcome, everyone. We've had a very exciting conference till now. Great participation by the Ministry of Finance, and the trend continues. On this important topic of promoting foreign and domestic investments for achieving the Atmanirbhar Bharat goal. We have an exciting panel today. And firstly, most importantly, Mr. Raja Raman, who is currently the Additional Secretary with the Ministry of Finance in the Department of Economic Affairs. Mr. Raja Raman, for the time I've known him, is extremely astute and forward-looking. I'll almost call him a reformist who's looking at, key issues that we are facing on the investment sides, and he's always been proactive in resolving those issues. He's a Tamil Nadu cadre IS officer, senior IS officer, who's had various positions in investment promotion, FDI, public sector undertakings, and in tax. So anytime we go in front of him, we need to be very, very fully aware of all the asks, because he can pick up on all issues really, really quickly. He's interestingly a certified trainer in the incident command system for disaster management, and has served as disaster rescue team disaster rescue team leader in tsunami relief. And his special interests include right to information, industry policy, investment promotion, human development, consumer protection, disaster management, and entrepreneurship. So very varied and well-rounded interests are welcome. And thank you so much for joining us today. We also have Sujoy, who's the MD and founder CEO of NIF, and is currently based in Mumbai. Prior to joining NIF, he spent 25 years at IFC, with his last stint being co-head of the Infrastructure and Natural Resources Division based in Washington, managing $14 billion portfolio for IFC. This NIF is, I recently found out, not his first venture stint. He also set up a fund in Latin America, which was very successful, based out of Washington. And he's, of course, not new to India. He was here in India from 2006 to 2010 in heading the Mumbai office for IFC. Welcome, Sujoy. We also have Saurabh Agarwal, who is the managing director and in charge of CDPQ's infrastructure investment efforts in South Asia since 2017. And before joining CDPQ, he spent over 10 years at Morgan Stanley as an executive director last there as part of their global infrastructure fund, and has invested through both the roles at Morgan Stanley and CDPQ in various infrastructure sectors in India, including thermal, gas, wind, hydroelectricity, roads, etc. Mark brings an interesting perspective for us on the public market side. He's the Chief Executive Officer of ASIFMA, which is the Asia Securities Industry and Financial Markets Association. Their members have over $35 trillion in asset under management. Mark, since joining ASIFMA, has led the expansion to have a membership that has over 100 firms. He was also the CEO of Global Financial Markets Association from 2016 to 2018, which includes ASIFMA and AFME and various other organizations, including the Global SIFMA, which is the Securities Industry and Financial Market Association. So with that amazing panel, let me just quickly kick off. I was reading an article this morning in the Quint by Raghav Bal, who is comparing India and China, and the issues that India faces, when we look towards the growth that China has had. But without going into all the issues that we are all aware of when you make that comparison, interestingly, he concludes by saying India has all the necessary ingredients for strong growth. Good demographics, ambitious youth, high savings, strong institutions, and improved macroeconomic stability. Infrastructure building and skill development is crucial and will much depend on governance. So, infrastructure and governance, the two key issues that are highlighted, are both very well represented on this panel. And so, with that, let me start on the governance side. So, Mr. Rajaraman, if I can just get some opening remarks from you on the work being done. I know how active you are in terms of promoting investments into the country and taking measures in that regard. So, if we can just get highlights from you as to what the ministry is thinking in this regard right now.
Thank you, Pratibha, and happy morning to all the participants and panelists. First of all, congrats to FICCI for organizing this important conference. So, it actually sets people like us thinking, on better ways to do run government. I would like to first of all refer to the title of your conference, of your session on self-reliance and how we can foreign investment flows and so on and so forth. So, the Prime Minister spoke about this on May 12th, and he spoke of the 5 pillars on which I think this whole framework would work: economy, infrastructure, on systems, on demography and demand, and so on and so forth. So, I would like to state that first of all, that the economic transformation that we have been attempting to do over the period of time, I think, every 5 years brings new breath into a new fresh breath into what needs to be done. So I think this transformation calls for bold reforms. It's not as if we have not been doing bold reforms, but maybe the next phase of bold reforms that are required. So it is only such kind of reforms that bring in quantum shifts, I think, or transformative changes. Second thing is that is about infrastructure. I think when we talk about infrastructure, we are looking at something which enables business to drive down costs, especially manufacturing. I think infrastructure and reliable infrastructure. And then we have the issue of of the 21st century, which requires investments in technology and leading to innovation. I think will bring the revenues of the future. So that also will require investment. So essentially, what I'm trying to say is that economic transformation, infrastructure development, intellectual property development, all of them will lead to self-reliance, but they will require huge amounts of capital. So that is the underlying point that we would say. Good amount of capital and a lot of good governance. I think a lot of other things might be required, but certainly capital and governance. So, before I go on to the, what we think about, how we can go about it, I would also like to touch upon this concept of self-reliance, because I think this is being talked about quite avidly, with the Prime Minister having introduced it. So essentially, I think we are looking at this as an opportunity to reform. I think. So that I think would be the underlying principle of behind self-reliance, because one has to be self-reliant. Obviously, I think it has to be. We have to be able to do a lot more things more efficiently in better ways than we are doing now, which essentially requires a lot of reform. So we would look at, say, areas like labor, logistics, contract enforcement, land reforms, and so on and so forth, in order to bring down the costs of business and to bring down the difficulties of doing business. And so essentially, I think this is the underlying theme. So if you look at the concept, I think we are also looking at how to promote efficiency, how to promote resilience in manufacturing and provision of services. We are also looking at how to make India more open and more attractive. And essentially, we need to bring in world-class companies with capital, more of them. So essentially, I think if you may cut it short, I think I would say that we need to do our competitiveness, as simple as that. So our competitiveness, both in terms of manufacturing, in terms of retaining our competitive edge in services, and so on and so forth. So I guess if you look at our track record, I think of reforms, I think last 5 years, I think it's very difficult things which are in the realm of impossibility have all been achieved in terms of, say, the goods and services tax, bank reforms, insolvency and bankruptcy code, ease of doing business reforms. So a lot of things have been achieved. And there may be work in progress where there are a lot more things to be done, maybe in phase 2, phase 3. Certainly, I think the roadmap has been laid and the road has been laid. We are progressing towards where we should be. And if you look at the recent spate of reforms, I think one of the sectors which have been untouched by reforms is agriculture. And I think essentially we're looking at very critical reforms which have actually enabled market-based actors to actively come forward and work with farmers directly in order to bring in investments in agriculture. So, and the launch of the Agriculture Infrastructure Fund, Animal Husbandry Infrastructure Fund, etc., I think will provide the overall framework for actually enabling better investments in agriculture. Similarly, the case of MSMEs, I think the definition of MSMEs, keeping them small, I think keeping them wedded to subsidies and so on and so forth, I think is partly been done away because of the rise in the size of the MSMEs. So I'm sure that now there will be an overall trend of small companies trying to grow bigger, I think. And so we hope that will also lead to bigger companies, stronger companies, and so on and so forth. Similarly, I think the labor codes, which are now in Parliament, will bring in a lot of reforms in terms of, say, using the cost of doing business, essentially, in terms of hiring and enabling, reducing the inspector regime that obtains in some parts of the country, and so on and so forth. So, in addition to the reforms, I think we have reforms in defense manufacturing. It's one of the areas where I think probably it's been untouched. So, I guess very bold reforms in terms of allowing a lot of domestic companies to come forward to manufacture, a lot of defense items, serving some of them for domestic manufacturing, creating a domestic capital budget for manufacturing. So, these are some of the measures which actually will enable even foreign companies to come and set up shop in India for manufacturing of arms and ammunition. And we also have the case of space, where a lot of efforts have been taken to throw up. Now, two entities have been created: the National New Space India Limited and the InSpace. The two entities which have been created to promote innovation and private sector participation in space technology. So, essentially, now if I may go to infrastructure, I think you must have heard about the National Infrastructure Pipeline, which there are about. I think Sujoy will certainly talk more about that. But essentially, I think what we as government are looking at is how to ensure financing this process. Because in many ministries, both in the central government and the state government, even in the private sector, have very ambitious plans for infrastructure projects. But the question is that how do we enable financing this? So obviously, we need a lot of capital. And you must have heard the recent the budget announcement about the tax exemption for sovereign wealth funds and pension funds and so on and so forth. This is going to be a big step forward. And we hope that the notifications laying down the way in which they can invest will probably come out very soon, I think, and that will probably see a lot of interest in global pension funds and so funds. So if you look at the national infrastructure pipeline, I think if you look at about, say, the 1.4 trillion that we're looking at least about, say, 60%, 60 to 70% of that will come as debt and the rest as equity. So essentially, it means that a number of reforms have to be done, essentially. There is a very large sum of money that is called to come in. So reforms which essentially look at enabling infrastructure sector to run commercially, essentially. And if you look at power sector, railways, and many other sectors, we require reforms which enable companies to actually run on core commercial principles of revenue generation, I think on revenue meeting the costs. I'm sure that a number of reforms, such as the tariff policy and so on and so forth, will enable this to happen. Second thing which I see, in fact, I joined in a few other sessions as well, just to listen to what people are saying. So I think I hear the same theme again about honoring and enforcing contracts. I think this is a very important theme, and the rule of law, I think, is very important from the point of view of India. And we see a lot of aberrations in some parts of the country, certainly, yes. But if you look at overall, I think we are looking at very significant steps that have been taken in 2018 through the Specific Relief Amendment Act, where the focus of enforcement of contracts has shifted to enforcement rather than say that, than the other way around. So, and the setting up of designated courts, the New Delhi International Arbitration Center. So, these are all things which I am sure that over the course of time will enable contracts to be enforced faster. But essentially, I think we have the Department of Industry working on how to reduce the time taken for enforcement of contracts. There have been questions on even simple checks needing to be followed up for being honored and so on and so forth. So I'm sure that this is a very major, big question that we are following up very significantly, and we hope that maybe in the next couple of years, a very hard nut to crack, but nevertheless, I think the government is very serious about this. Similarly, if you look at the next set of work that we need to do is to bring in domestic pension and insurance funds into the business of financing infrastructure. They also have been there, but there I'm sure that a lot more revision to the investment guidelines and so on and so forth to facilitate local investments also into infrastructure sector growing, better than before. Asset monetization in another area where I think about a pipeline of about 1 lakh crores has been laid out by the Niti Aayog. We are now requesting Niti Aayog to bring out a 5-year asset monetization pipeline. So there is a forward-looking indication to the market to tell them as to what kind of assets will come to the market. So there is greater understanding, discussions before they actually come to the market. Similarly, I think we are also looking at how to strengthen the financial institutions because debt financing is going to be the biggest challenge. And I think Sujoy may talk more about that. But essentially, we look at it to deliver about, say, overall about 50, 60 lakh crores out of the 100 lakh crores, 111 lakh crores that we are planning. Very large financing by the banks as well as by the specialist financial institutions. So, government is working on upgrading the IIFCL. We're looking at a debt platform with NIF, which have been announced in the budget, with an investment of about 22,000 crores. So all these measures, I'm sure, will stand in stead. The last, I would end by saying that we need to work very seriously on the bond market, because the bond market is going to be the biggest, growth area, essentially. Because while bank credit will remain a mainstay, the fastest growth, I think, would come in the bond market if we can strengthen contract enforcement, introduce we have a new bill which is in Parliament, the netting of bilateral financial contracts. I'm sure that this also will enable a vibrant credit default swap market to develop, which in turn will support bond markets and so on and so forth. So I will end by saying that government is doing is the process of introducing a number of reforms in attracting investments, especially in terms of, say, infrastructure, in FDI, and so on and so forth. So we would be very happy to work with the industry. And in fact, I would like to end by saying that we have set up in the Interministerial Steering Committee on financing the infrastructure pipeline. And this committee headed by Secretary DEA is now working with market players. In fact, Saurabh and a couple of others are already, Sujoy, they're all part of this team. I think a lot more other players were also part of this. So we would be very happy to pick their brains and then work together to ensure, how we can achieve the process of financing this massive project. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. In fact, all these measures are very visible. In fact, the circular you were mentioning actually came out yesterday on the sovereign wealth funds, how they should get notified for the tax incentives. But I think, from where we have seen it, NIF is probably a major move, very successful model that the Ministry of Finance had initially conceived, and it's now taken forward by the team at NIF to boost investments through public money at that time when infrastructure funding was especially in equity, was not there. And now, we have, this platform where, investing on commercial terms while leveraging investment by other sovereign wealth funds and international investors. I think moves like these really help not only get capital into the country, but boost confidence, when something like this is extremely successful. So let me just bring in Sujoy to just talk about how that experience has been.
Thanks, Pratibha, and hello to everyone. Good morning to everyone, and hello to my fellow panelists as well. We had a fascinating discussion even before this panel started, so really appreciate being part of it. I would actually like to start by saying that outside the OECD countries, India is, in my mind, the largest market for infrastructure investors. And actually, the risk-return trade-off is actually not bad. And that is why a lot of foreign capital is interested in this market. The returns are reasonable and the scale is there. Potentially, the scale is there. And also, like Mr. Rajaraman was saying, that many things are being improved. I mean, Mr. Rajaraman and the DEA, the line ministries, they're actually taking a lot of input from all of us who are the investment community to try to make these gradual changes, which actually gives a lot of credibility to the infrastructure investment program as well. And I think that's why we have CDPQ, glad that Saurabh is on the panel, and many other pension funds, sovereign funds, insurance companies and also operators from outside India coming in and wanting to invest in India. And also there is, as we have seen, quite a bit of interest inside India as well in some of these sectors such as renewables, airports, and so on, which is great. I know that my fellow colleagues on the panel will talk about a lot of things that could be improved, and of course, there is always, we have to have a focus on what could be improved. But I'm going to talk about 2-3 aspects that I think is very, very important. So I think if we have to talk about NIIF, I think the first thing that we have to point out is that I think government figured out several years ago, or 4 or 5 years ago, that to actually address the infrastructure investment challenge at scale, not just one concept, but multiple things had to be done. And I think over the years, what we have seen is it's not just NIIF. We've seen NIIF, we've seen TOTs, we've seen InvITs, we've seen many different things that the government is doing, because what they've also come to the conclusion is that infrastructure investing is not the same for everyone. It's actually different people have different intentions and different interests. So just to offer the same product, which historically was BOT, to everyone is not going to work. So what they've actually done is they've taken different products and offered it to different people of different risk appetite, different time horizon, different expertise, etc. And I think that was a really important, I would say, awareness on the government and execution then to move into kind of that phase. And NIIF, of course, I think plays a very crucial role in that part, because one of the big issues, and this is one of the 2 items that I think, from NIIF standpoint, is the most important things we always keep in mind. One of the big issues that international investors run into when they want to invest into India is a local partner. A local partner who has the governance, who has the scale, who has the expertise, who has the time horizon to help them. Many of them are convinced about the opportunity in India. They just need to find the channel. And NIIF, I think, was a very interesting innovation by the government, which had Government of India putting up their skin in the game and supporting it. So Mr. Rajaraman is on our board, and Mr. Rajaraman and Mr. Bajaj are extremely helpful for us as we design the governance and we take things forward. So government puts skin in the game and supports the platform. Second is we have 4 large Indian investors. So foreign investors always like to see local commercial capital sitting alongside them. And so we have 4, including two insurance companies. So this gave people a lot of comfort. And then now we have 2 sovereign funds, 3 pension funds, 2 multilateral agencies who are all investors in NIIF funds. And so we've managed to create this collaborative platform, which not just for India, but I think across the world has actually become a role model. So kudos to the Ministry of Finance and the Government of India, because I think also with the way that they have handled this, which is they have kept the governance at arm's length, they've kept investment decision making to the professionals, but at the same time they have supported with their where it needs support. And so you'll be amazed, Pratibha, that I'm talking to, I get calls from Latin America, from Africa, from Asian countries who all want to set up their NIIF. And we've actually been, we are being talked about, by large scale organizations who see this collaborative model where government, domestic capital and foreign capital come together to make a big difference in the infrastructure financing in emerging markets. Maybe they'll also, some of these ideas may even work in OECD markets. So it's an interesting innovation, and it's been, I think from the government standpoint, it's been executed well. We've got great momentum. But also what we've done is we've not just created funds, but what we are also doing is creating actually operating companies which will live way beyond the life of the funds, because it's those operating companies ultimately that will actually create the expertise and create the operating efficiencies that are required, like Mr. Rajaraman said, to bring down logistics expenses, to make sure that renewables can be managed, and grow well and managed properly, et cetera, et cetera. So that was the one thing. The second thing I wanted to talk about, where NIIF is also playing, in partnership with the government, we intend to play a very important role, is the market is large, potentially, but actually the opportunities that come to the market have not been that large yet. So if I look at the last 4 years, government monetization, most of these operating infrastructure assets, which are more interesting for foreign capital, actually sit with the government. But if we really look at how much of that has come out to the market, it's not much. Over the last 4 years, I would say probably only about $3 billion. Now, NIF itself is going to be $6 billion of money and maybe more, because we're also getting co-invests of another $3 billion. So maybe we are $9-10 billion of capital. We want to see pipeline. We want to see deal flow. And this means that I would strongly encourage Mr. Rajaraman and the government to continue. I mean, I'm delighted to hear what he said about asset monetization. Bring 50, $60 billion of potential opportunities to the market. And I should have, we would like to have like a 10% share. We are not going to have a 100% share, right? But I'm sure Saurabh and CDPQ and CPPIB and all these ADIA, all these guys will invest, and also intermediaries like us will form to actually take advantage of those opportunities. The opportunities today are mostly coming from private sector M&A, but that is limited. The real opportunity is with government monetization, and that is also where NIF is helping. So we have actually created a group within NIF, which is a non-investment group. They are actually advisory, and so they help Mr. Rajaraman and his colleagues design transactions for the market and feed into them what the market would like to see when they actually bring these assets to monetization. So with those two things, which is creating channels for capital to come in and helping to expand the pie of potential investable opportunities, we hope that we can make a big difference. I mean, we can talk about the NIP because I have a lot of ideas, and Mr. Rajaman also knows many of our ideas. I mean, the NIP is a phenomenal opportunity because for the first time in India, we can look at a compendium of all the large infrastructure projects in the central government and in many state governments across sectors. It actually is a pathway to us identifying what we want to do. Now, as Mr. Rajaraman said, we need to focus on the financing part of it. And my gut feel, the financing is there. We just need to start figuring out how to apply it to the NIP. With that, I'll pass it back to you, brother.
Yeah, thank you so much, Sujoy. In fact, I want to tell you and Mr. Rajaraman, I was at the Milken conference in Abu Dhabi earlier when we could travel in the year. And NIF was actually mentioned in the discussions as a structure to look out for infrastructure investments. It was a very proud moment, actually, sitting there and hearing that. But I can also second. We've seen the push, for example, for road tenders or even other tenders in the infrastructure sector now. We see the ministries putting in specific provisions for funds to invest, which earlier they were all set up for companies to invest. So we are definitely seeing the push on the infrastructure side at all levels, just not just at the Ministry of Finance. But on that note, on infrastructure and the importance of infrastructure building, sort of CDPQ has been a great friend of India. You've done a large number of investments in India, but just can you talk about what your future investment strategy for India is, especially in infrastructure sector, which is, as we've discussed, key for the self-reliance goal?
Okay. Thank you, Pratibha. And I would first of all would like to thank FICCI for the opportunity and to participate with this eminent group of panels. And Sujoy, your thoughts were just absolutely fantastic in terms of what an infrastructure investor would like to know or hear in the government. So maybe just to put in perspective as to what we have done, we put constructive capital to work the way we like to think about capital, where we put capital and our expertise together. And in following and doing that, we basically hinge upon three core philosophies worldwide. Long-term focus, partnerships, which you spoke about, Sujoy, and sustainability considerations. And in India, what I like to do, particularly for infrastructure, I think we add two more dimensions to it. looking at the opportunity that we can benefit from for the growth in the Indian economy for the long term, we have chosen the strategy of creating platforms which we can reinvest into for a long period of time and continuously reinvest to build companies. Again, something similar to what you've spoken about, Sujoy. And the second is to ensure alignment with all the stakeholders for growing our business, be it the government, the management team, be it the local partner, be it our lenders. We like to build alignment. And with that as a philosophy, overall, what we have done so far since 2016, when CDPQ opened its offices in New Delhi, we have invested across 5 different asset classes, invested or committed 35,000 crores across public equity, debt, infrastructure, private equity, and real estate. We have been very fortunate to establish some very marquee partnerships along the roads, and we continue to strive and work with our partners to jointly build and grow our businesses with them for the long term. Particularly for infrastructure, we have committed about 5,000 crores in equity across 2 platforms thus far with our strategic partners. We have a solar business where we hold 51%. India is one of the largest solar platforms present in 24 states, 3 gigawatts installed capacity, and significant pipeline of over 4 gigawatts. The reason I mention this platform is core to this topic relevant for Atmanirbhar mission, as this platform has the potential to provide and boost in one aspect, which is the solar panel manufacturing industry, by providing high quality domestically manufactured panels. Because we have a pipeline which is particularly linked to the manufacturing sector, and this will provide impetus for the domestic manufacturing. And we are very proud of this platform to be helping it in its own way in the Atmanirbhar mission. The other platform we set up is a utilities platform. Again, we are a very significant 40% joint venture partner in a utilities business, which has presence in generation, transmission, and distribution potentially. Again, this platform is slated to grow through M&A, through greenfield in wind, solar, transmission, providing local employment wherever we operate our projects, and hopefully also provide impetus to the local manufacturing. In addition to this, what we are looking for in the near term, the most imminent one is a road sector platform, which is effectively to collect the operating roads, whether it is in the toll sector or it is the annuities. We've already established the INVIT for it, which is thanks to DEA, PMO, and many other government offices to have this INVIT set up, INVIT platform well set. And so we've already done that, which is in place, and we are now looking for acquisition of assets through this platform. There are other sectors which are of keen interest, which we are looking for. Just to name some examples, we're interested in railways, airports, e-mobility, telecom networks, fiber, and water and sanitation, to just name a few in infrastructure. I think you all spoke about the NIP. I think NIP is a great document. We are obviously keenly watching what we can transact in out of the NIP list. But one thing I would say is that because India is seeing institutional capital just as a starting point, I think there is a difference in views of how you invest capital when you start in the beginning versus how bold you get as you establish platforms and you are fairly well established in the country. So as a starting point, when investors come in, they like to invest into operating assets, try and take minimal construction risk. And once the platforms are well established, then we slowly venture into the construction risk. At least that's how we have seen the general philosophy as we start getting approvals from. And therefore, what you talked about, Mr. Rajaraman, with respect to the asset monetization program and having the pipeline of assets which can be transacted, which are operational assets, they become extremely important. And we completely look forward to this document, the business plan that you talked about for the next 5 years, a rolling business plan effectively, which provides visibility to the investors as to what they can look forward to in the next few years. which then results into our own business plan management and our own allocations, if you will, for different sectors and different opportunities that we can look for. So that, I think, is where we are heading. That's our initial thought, Pratibha, and pass on back to you.
Thanks, Saurabh. Let me just bring in Mark for the discussion, because Mark, your organization represents a very important component of the India success story. And typically, we don't. They don't have a voice if not for organization like you. They will either invest, or if they don't like what they see, they will just quietly not invest. So if I can just bring you into the conversation and let us know, how are your constituents seeing the Indian markets? We think we fared really, really well given the pandemic and the other issues globally. Indian markets have sustained themselves really well. Do you have inputs from what India is doing right or wrong, and what is required?
Thank you, Pratibha. And thank you very much for the introduction. Thank you, FICCI, for inviting me here today. I'm very, very honored to be able to be part of this really esteemed panel. And I think, as you said, the equity markets have held up pretty well. I think in Asian terms, I would say in U.S. dollar terms, performance-wise for this last year, over a very challenging time, and a particularly challenging time around COVID-19. And we know in India that still in the middle of this, and I suspect it's going to be with us for some time globally until a vaccine is found. But as I said, it seems to me that and I was just checking again this morning that India is basically about in the middle, where you kind of would expect it. Hong Kong, Singapore are down significantly over the year. China's up pretty good, and I think that's because they've been able to get the virus under control, and you've seen them kind of spring back. And then you got Korea and Japan up a little bit. Again, they've kept the virus at bay, probably better than most. Obviously, the U.S. is up, and Nasdaq is through the roof. But Europe is pretty much down across the board. So I think that's a pretty good performance, considering the circumstances that we faced. And I think I was very encouraged by Mr. Rajaraman's speech earlier. I completely concur, and our members would concur, that India has huge potential, really huge potential as a market. It really is the future in this region. And a lot has been done in recent times by the government, by the regulators, SEBI, RBI. You mentioned GST reform, ease of doing business. A lot of these reforms have been really, really helpful. And I really also was really encouraged to hear the strong focuses on competitiveness, because, as you mentioned, Pratibha, really it is a question about competing for capital with other countries, and also on the efficiency of the markets and the reforms around the markets that are still being undertaken. And so that's very strong. And maybe just a few things, and as you mentioned, around the public market. So we're not really focused on the infrastructure side, where we know there's a big need and really, really great opportunities in India. Are going to focus more on the equity markets, fixed income markets, etc. And I guess the first thing, is access. How do you access those markets as a foreign investor? And again, very big reforms over recent times. The Khan Committee made a lot of recommendations, and the vast majority of those have been implemented and accepted, including we made a number as our association. The vast majority of them have been taken up, very welcome by foreign portfolio investors. But I still would say that accessing the Indian markets is a bigger challenge than, say, compared to China in recent times. If you want to go into the Chinese markets through Stock Connect or Bond Connect, it's a matter of days before you're set up, and you can kind of go through Hong Kong very, very easily. So we would like to see some of those reforms made simpler and easier to attract foreign investment into India, whether that's through Gift City as a conduit, in the way Hong Kong is a conduit to China, or directly onshore. We think we would like to see a lot, still some more reforms on that. In our side around, once you get onshore, our view is, there's a huge amount of great opportunities. but simplicity around the conditions. Quite often there's quite a lot of foreign ownership limits, vary from instrument to instrument. There's periods of investment that you need to observe. These type of things can be very difficult for foreign investors to get their minds around, and sometimes challenging just to manage operationally. And I think that brings me to the next point around consistent. As much as possible, we know that every market's going to have their own domestic wrinkles. I mean, that's just natural. But as much as possible, adopting the international best practices, that allow global operating models to operate. I mean, these things are very much preferred by investors. So things like data localization and any kind of moves to that obviously frustrates that, both from operating onshore, when you're kind of having to try to manage a global book. That can be quite challenging. On the domestic markets, again, as you said, a lot of really positive reforms recently. I definitely like the focus on the bond market. We would agree with Mr. Rajaraman that having a deep liquid capital market for the fixed income side as an alternative, not a replacement of, but an alternative to loans is really important. And to do that, we still see a lot of reforms around the OTC derivative markets in general, and foreign investors in particular want to hedge their risks. And so development of those is important, and becoming, boring things like a netting friendly jurisdiction are very important. So we'd like to see that. And then maybe the final thing I would sort of mention is tax. that terrible word tax, that we completely support the fact that, and even actually I think in a post-COVID world, we're going to have to see probably countries think very long and hard about how they tax their citizens to pay for what they've had to actually do to get us through this period. But anything around simplification, harmonization of the tax regime that makes it easier for investors to understand, and treating the investors in similar situations the same way are definitely things that are really important. And I think that's an area where we would very happy to work with the ministry a bit more on our thoughts in relation to that, because our view is actually that being able to kind of for investors to be able to understand that it's